Welcome and thank you for joining PwC's webcast, International Assignment Basics, Planning for Successful Assignments Abroad. This webcast will run for approximately 60 minutes. Before we begin the session, we have a few reminders. For a better viewing experience, please close all other applications. To ensure you can hear today's webcast properly, please make sure the volume on your speakers is turned up, in addition to the volume control on the media player. For better sound quality, please use headphones. And if you experience difficulty with the audio, please press F5. To print a copy of the presentation, please click on the green Resource List widget and then select Download Slides. If you have trouble reading a particular slide at any point, to enlarge it, simply click on the green Slide Map button in the top right corner of the slide area. At any point during the presentation, please feel free to submit a question by typing it into the Q&A window located on the left-hand side of your screen and then clicking the Submit button. We will attempt to answer as many questions as possible as they arise or during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation, time permitting. Polling questions will also be posed during this live webcast to enhance your online experience. Your full participation in today's webcast qualifies you to receive 1 hour of Continuing Professional Development, or CPD credit. Please note, in order to receive this CPD credit, you must be present for the entire live webcast and participate by responding to the 4 live polling questions that will appear on your screen at intervals throughout the presentation. CPD credit cannot be awarded for participants who are not logged onto this webcast as themselves, who participate over the phone, or attend the on-demand version. And for those qualifying for CPD credit, a certificate will be sent to you shortly after the webcast to the email address used for registration. The certificate will acknowledge 1 hour of structured learning towards the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Ontario CPD requirement or similar accreditation. For those webcast participants in other jurisdictions, you should follow up with your local governing body to confirm if it meets requirements. This entire presentation will be archived and available for later viewing. And now I'm pleased to introduce Chantal Farrell-Carter, our moderator for today's session.
Good afternoon, all. Welcome to our webcast, Planning for Successful Assignments Abroad. I am Chantal Farrell-Carter, a partner in the International Assignment Services Group within the Toronto Tax Practice. With me today are Jennifer Powell and David D'Souza, both senior managers in our Toronto practice. Before embarking on the journey of international assignments, it is important to develop a policy that is, 1, in alignment of your company's global business and talent strategy, 2, addresses global tax, immigration, and compliance challenges, 3, cost-effective, 4, flexible to address regional differences and different assignment lengths, 5, ensures the success of the assignment and the successful repatriation of the employee from assignment, and 6, addresses which parts of the organization are accountable for delivering the different components of your policy. As you can see, a mobility policy addresses much more than just the delivery of assignment allowances. I will now pass it on to Jennifer and David. Jennifer will first walk us through the objectives of today's session. Jennifer?
Hello, everyone. In order to increase their earnings, more and more Canadian companies are seeking to expand their global presence, whether through setting up new overseas operations or by working on particular projects abroad. Often the easiest way to do this in the beginning is to send employees overseas for some length of time. While it can be relatively simple to get from one country to another, there are multiple issues to consider to ensure that the international assignment is successful. Today we will walk you through some of those issues, and we'll discuss key points to consider when setting up a policy for these transfers. Now we have our first polling question.
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, to give an idea of our audience component today, we'll ask you to answer the following polling questions. How many employees does your company currently have on international assignments? Is it 0 to 10? Is it 10 to 40? 40 to 100? More than 100? Or if you're uncertain? If you don't know the exact number of employees on international assignment, just make your best guess. We've included uncertain as an option because there are some companies that truly do not have a complete picture of their mobile population. Even large corporations with staff dedicated to global mobility struggle in this area. So now we're going to look at the results of our polling. Just waiting for those to come through on the screen. And here we go. So as you can see, most individuals have answered 0 to 10. What I particularly like about the uncertain part of it is that many companies, even though they may have a good handle or think they have a good handle on the assignee population, when we start to delve into commuters and business travelers, you'll find that really that's where the uncertain number comes into place, because a lot of companies do not have a good handle of that size of population. So now we're going to pass it back over to Jennifer, who's now going to go through the agenda for today.
Okay. As I mentioned, our goal is to walk you through some of the items to consider in setting up an international assignment policy. In addition to looking at the objectives of an assignment policy, we're going to look at the life cycle of the assignment and some of the issues at each stage of the assignment. When we talk about a successful assignment, we're looking at it from the perspective of both the employer and the employee. Success can be measured in many different ways. Did the company or business unit meet its objectives in the host location? Did the individual actually complete the assignment? Did the assignee stay with the company after his or her return home? Did the company and the assignee comply with all tax and regulatory matters relating to the assignment? In order to fully assess whether the assignment was successful, it is necessary to determine at the beginning why your company or business unit is sending someone abroad, and to have a process in place that will increase the chance of the answers to the previous questions being yes. We will wrap up by summarizing your planning steps and looking at a case study to get you started on sending assignees abroad. So first, why would your business transfer an employee to another country? The main reasons are to set up new operations, or maybe you just want to expand your foreign presence, to complete a specific project, to develop the host country staff so that they can eventually run that local offshoot, and to disseminate head office knowledge and practices throughout the organization. Another reason might be career development. International experience is sometimes now considered a requirement for individuals who are being groomed for leadership positions within the company, since a company that is already operating in other countries wants leaders who are able to understand their key markets and oversee a global workforce. Finally, employees often now actively seek out an international transfer because they believe it will provide valuable work experience and personal development, and also improve their long-term career prospects. So offering a transfer helps in retaining these employees. Whatever the reason for deciding to relocate employees to an international location, it is important that the company have a policy that supports the strategies of the business, that treats employees consistently, that facilitates timely and successful transfers of employees, and that puts processes in place to manage compliance and minimize the reputational or other risks to the company. Having an overall assignment policy also helps the company to manage both administrative and assignment costs, since it provides administrators with the information they need to quickly respond to employees, decreases the need for senior HR personnel to be involved in the actual process of sending employees abroad, and reduces the chance of one-off deals being offered to employees. To be clear, an assignment policy encompasses many elements, including benefits, relocation, immigration, employment law, taxation, and compliance. In developing the policy, you need to address the governance structure. You also need to have a policy framework in place. This way, all your sub-policies will be consistent. You should ensure that there is supporting documentation, for example, assignment letters or secondment arrangements. You should also consider what kind of outside supports you might need, such as immigration or payroll support services. The policy should finally clearly state which group or person owns each section. This is helpful to both employees and those administering the policy, and allows the organization to hold individuals responsible for the proper functioning of the International Assignment Program. Now that we've considered what you're trying to achieve with the policy, let's look at the life cycle of the assignment. David?
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to join you here today to talk about this important topic. The main idea that comes to mind for me is that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I mention this to my kids at home, but it seems like the only time they really take this to heart is when they're trying to accomplish something quietly without their parents knowing. The overall keys to success for any business include careful planning, execution, and review. This leads to further planning, and the cycle continues. When we talk about all the individual steps that, when put together, become an international assignment, we refer to the big picture view as the assignment life cycle. It includes a number of stages that apply regardless of whether you're sending one individual on a short-term assignment or a group of employees on long-term assignments. This multicolored image that you're seeing is one representation of the assignment life cycle. This by no means is the only way of depicting the cycle. However, the general concepts remain the same. So let's take a brief look at each segment individually. We'll start with assignment identification. Two questions that have many possible answers. Why is an international assignment needed? And what are the desired outcomes for the business and its employees? Quite simply put, success is rare if you don't know where you need to be and when you need to be there. So creating a solid foundation for the assignment is important. Second stage is assignee selection. Now that you know what you want to achieve, you have to look at the personnel that have just the right fit. This can be very challenging as a business has to weigh many factors and determine the optimum person or persons to help the business reach its goals. As you'll see, there is much more to think about than just individual talent and experience. Once you know what the assignment is and who's the optimal person for the task, it's time to look at some of the finer details before the assignment actually starts. So what are the legal, the immigration, the administrative matters that need to be addressed before the employee ever boards that plane? How much is the assignment going to cost the company? What options do the employers and employee have? All these matters fall within the pre-departure planning stage. Next is the moment that you've spent weeks or months preparing for, the actual relocation abroad at the start of the assignment. Later on, we'll discuss some of the challenges that can arise during the relocation itself. All right, so you've created your plan, set it in motion. Now it's time to keep it running smoothly. There's plenty of ongoing administration, and there are usually smaller monthly, quarterly, and even annual cycles in both locations, the home and the host. This includes payroll reporting and income tax compliance. So the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. And now it's time to repatriate the employee back to the home location. The repatriation stage is the actual move out of the host. With successful planning, using the tips Jennifer and I are providing to you today, repatriation issues will already have been considered well in advance, much earlier in the assignment life cycle. Repatriation does not occur in all instances, however. The employee could localize in the host location, or they could move on to start another assignment. The last stage in the assignment life cycle is post-assignment review. I'll step away from the life cycle for a second. When we have a medical issue to address, we don't typically wait until symptoms are reaching an advanced stage. We initially monitor the situation and then determine how and when to attend to the matter. The same applies for international assignments. You cannot let an assignment sit unattended in any one stage and then look back only when everything is complete. The health of the assignment must be reviewed throughout the life cycle. However, it is important, again, to take that big picture approach after the assignee has repatriated. This will allow you to spot the key areas of development and make changes for other assignments. And also, equally important, a review allows you to celebrate the achievements within your business so that other people hear about the great opportunities and strive to be the next expatriate. Ongoing assignment, repatriation, and post-assignment review are all important steps within the assignment life cycle. Taking the time to front-load the planning in the initial 3 stages will certainly lead to a reduction in the time and resources you need to execute the last 3 stages. We'll continually refer back to the assignment life cycle image throughout today's session. You'll see it repeated on each slide in the top right corner, with the segments applicable to that slide highlighted. In some cases, you'll see multiple segments will be highlighted, and this just goes to show that some concepts don't just sit within one stage of the cycle, and they need to be considered at multiple points. So Jennifer, now that we understand the assignment life cycle, walk us through what we need to think about during the assignment identification stage.
Okay, David. One of the first factors to consider is the expected length of the assignment that is needed in order for the company to meet the goals that it has currently set. These may best be accomplished through a permanent transfer or a temporary transfer. It is obviously easier to get an individual to agree to a permanent relocation if the move was initiated by the employee. But even business-initiated permanent relocations could be accepted if the location is very familiar to the individual or he has some connection already to the host country. You can also have a permanent transfer when an individual who has been on a temporary assignment decides to stay in the host location. At that time, they're considered localized. You should have a policy in place to handle permanent transfers, whether employee or business initiated. However, we're going to focus today on temporary transfers. Temporary transfers can be either short-term or long-term. The definition of each depends on the company, but typically we see companies defining short-term as anywhere up to 18 months, and long-term, the transfer that is expected to last 2 to 5 years. As you can see on this slide, within the short-term area, there are various alternatives. Which one the company chooses would depend on what works best for the business and the employee. Definitions vary, but a commuter generally stays in the host location for a set number of days each week or month for an extended period. So, for example, an individual works in the foreign country Monday to Friday and returns home for the weekend and has this scheduled for an 8-month period. A business traveler would have work trips either the same or various locations, but generally wouldn't have a fixed schedule each month. This would include someone who's attending meetings on a quarterly basis, as well as someone who's in the host location to provide specific services or oversee a business area. A short-term assignment, or STA, would involve someone who is based in the host location full-time for an extended period, generally 3 to 18 months. While a short-term assignment would be used if the company has a specific project in the host location or to transfer technical knowledge, the long-term assignment is generally used if the company is setting up new operations or expanding in the host location. It is also used if the individual is being transferred as part of his career progression with the expectation that he or she will return to head office to eventually take on a senior role in the organization. The reason for the assignment and the seniority of the individual being transferred can determine whether the individual receives a traditional expatriate package or receives reduced benefits through a modified local arrangement. With the modified local, if the country is a higher cost country, the individual would generally be offered a salary in line with local levels, as well as assistance with the higher cost of housing. He would then be responsible for all his own taxes and any other costs in the host location. It is important to make an informed decision at the beginning about the expected length of the assignment. While circumstances can mean a change in the future, you should note that when assignments are extended from a very short term, say 3 months, to 7 or more months, this can lead to unexpected tax consequences. Now we have our second polling question.
The second polling question for the day is, what is your company's primary goal in sending employees on assignment? So we're looking at the answers being transfer of knowledge to the host entity, development of the employee going abroad, employee satisfaction and retention, or other. We'll give you a couple of minutes for the poll results to come through while we look at some of the questions that have come in from the audience. So one of the questions from the audience, Jen, I'll probably direct this to you. Which departments should be involved in developing a mobility policy or process?
To be all the departments that it may affect. For example, not just HR, but also tax, corporate tax, finance, payroll, and the business unit heads.
Okay. So definitely it's not just HR and what the normal person would think. We do have to really encompass a lot of different departments to make this mobility process a success.
Correct.
Okay. Another question from the audience. Is an assignment equal to secondment? I don't know, David, if you want to take a chance at answering that?
Not necessarily. Assignment and secondment don't have to be exactly the same thing. It really depends on the purpose that the individual is going to that foreign location. It could just be to achieve a particular result for the host, or it could be something for the home country. It depends.
And I think, too, what may be happening is there's a little bit of confusion around the term secondment. A secondment is when you actually are loaning an individual or employee to another entity, whereas an assignment just describes the movement of the employee from one entity to another. A secondment is like a formal agreement with structure in place. So this person actually moves away from your direction and control to the direction and control of the host entity. So that's the subtle difference. If I haven't answered the question completely, please get back to us and we can answer it further on. So now we're going to bring the polling question or polling results out. And we're going to see that the main reason for sending employees on assignment is to transfer knowledge to the host entity. So as we thought, that would be it. You'll find, once Jennifer starts talking into trends, you may find that the reasons that we're sending more and more individuals on assignments have been changing and will change, especially with our Gen X and millennial generation coming up. So, maybe in a few years, we may see a shift in these results coming through. So on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to assignee selection, the next section of our presentation.
Okay, thanks, Chantal. We mentioned at the beginning that success is measured both by whether the company achieves its objectives and whether the transferred employee completes the assignment. By this we mean that the employee stays on assignment for at least the expected amount of time, is successful in adapting to the host location and engaging with the local employees, and stays with the company upon return to Canada. Multiple studies have shown that the main issue preventing people who are interested in an assignment from taking one is family considerations. And the primary factors in determining whether the individual stays on assignment for the expected period is the ability of both the transferee and his accompanying family members to acclimate to the new culture. Of course, the candidate selected is believed to have the necessary technical and business skills. But in determining the right candidate to send abroad, you also need to consider whether the individual is flexible and whether he can adapt easily and well to a culture that may be very different from his home. It is recommended that individuals be assessed for their flexibility, including their ability to deal with stress and their resourcefulness. They should also be assessed for their cultural openness, and it is recommended that cross-cultural training be provided to help them adapt their interpersonal skills to deal with different cultures. Providing such training is important even if they're going to a country that is seemingly very familiar, such as the US or the UK. As many of us travel for business or pleasure, we may think we understand the differences between life at home and abroad. Part of the destination service assistance is helping the employee and his family realize how different living as a local in the host location can be from when you're visiting as a tourist or business traveler. With our accompanying family members, the same care should be taken in determining whether they can also adapt to the new culture. And they should also be provided with the appropriate support, whether cultural orientation, language training, or educational assistance. By supporting the family, this allows the individual to focus on the job for which he was sent to the host location.
Jennifer, these days I see that the demographics of your typical expatriate are quite different from what they used to be, as few as, say, 5 or 10 years ago. What has changed?
In the global mobility space, the main trends that we are seeing relate to the length of the assignment and what is included in the policies. Both of these are caused by changes in demographics and a rapid sharing of information globally. We're seeing more short-term and alternative assignments driven by several factors. The current younger generations in the workforce, as Chantal mentioned, the millennials or Generation Y, are often keen to explore the world and live in various countries. Where they are being sent on assignments that are of a basic developmental nature, the desired learning or experience can usually be transferred within a few months. At the more senior levels, there are many dual-income couples where the family isn't willing to derail the other spouse's career for the sake of an assignment that could be accomplished without uprooting the entire family. Finally, because of the centralization of many internal functions, there are more companies who send people overseas for time-limited projects. For example, to set up systems that replicate the home company's systems, or to provide concentrated training to the local staff so that they can run the local entity without foreign on-the-ground oversight. In the area of policies, companies have realized that they need to be more robust because of the increasingly sophisticated regulatory environment in the host countries. For instance, border officers at airports are getting better at knowing the questions to ask to find out if your frequent business traveler is in their country for a purpose that requires a work permit rather than a visitor visa. They are also in some cases sharing this information with their country's tax authorities. This means that your company needs to be aware at all times of when your employees are traveling on business and have processes in place to determine when a tax or other obligation is triggered for those employees in the host location. Host countries are also looking for supporting documentation, such as secondment agreements, which confirm the relationship of the employee to the home and host entities. These help address the risk of the home entity having a permanent establishment in the host country and need to be in place. Policies are also changing because of the change in the typical assignee that now goes overseas. For example, with the more developmental assignments, the employees are eager to go and recognize that the assignment may benefit them more than the company in the long run, so it may not be necessary to provide as many allowances. Often a modified local arrangement is sufficient, or a plan that allows individuals to choose which benefits are most important to them. For example, having more trips allowed for family and friends to visit them in exchange for a smaller housing allowance. A more extreme form of this is to simply offer a lump sum allowance that the individual can spend in almost any way he or she wishes. Finally, we have seen very limited cases in some long-term policies that companies are changing them to be silent in relation to home housing. That is, no provision is being made for assistance with home sale or retention, and no hypothetical housing is charged. The thinking is that they don't want to have any influence in the decision the individual makes regarding home housing. For short-term policies, home housing will continue to be mentioned since it affects the taxability of some of the location benefits. We covered this taxability in more detail in our December 5th webcast. We talked there about Canadian temporary away-from-home rules and similar rules in other common expat locations. Please visit our website if you wish to listen to that webcast. It's archived, and a link to the HRS site is located near the end of this presentation.
So far, we've talked about how we determine our goals and select the employees who will help us reach those goals. As I mentioned earlier, the pre-departure planning stage is where you're looking at the smaller details of the assignment. You have to make sure you're properly budgeting for the assignment costs, addressing immigration and regulatory issues in the host location, as well as considering your administrative options and what resources you have available. These are all stepping stones that will eventually result in both the employer and the employee being ready to start the assignment. You'll notice the graphic on the current slide. It reflects a staggered path, and there are some hollow spaces here and there. This is a reflection of reality. There's no fixed path to success that works universally for everyone. Each assignment will have its own challenges that may not be applicable in all situations. Your path to success must reflect your particular circumstances. I can't stress enough that looking for a simple template solution just will not work in the long run. We'll talk in further detail about the more common pre-departure planning actions. One of the first things that comes to mind when you think about traveling to a foreign location is, what do I need to get in? Even if a formal visa is not required, there's usually an implied visitor's visa that limits the individual's length of stay and actions within that country. Jennifer mentioned a few minutes ago that immigration officers are on the lookout for people trying to enter with improper documents. Even worse than being refused entry without the proper documentation, the employee and employer may be penalized for failing to follow local employment regulations. This doesn't only apply to entry into the host location. I have seen a situation where an executive was denied re-entry into his home country. In this case, his home country was the United States, and U.S. immigration officers in the host location would not permit him to board the plane and return home. His supporting documentation had expired. His only choice at that time was to remain in the host country until he could obtain updated travel documents. And don't even get me started on all the added costs and problems that were created as a result of that. To deter companies from employing people illegally, foreign governments impose financial penalties. However, there are much more embarrassing events that could transpire. Just imagine for a minute. What would be required to have your employee released from jail halfway around the world after being imprisoned for illegally working there? Think about employee relations, public perception, not to mention the actual legal issues and costs themselves. What would happen if sanctions were imposed on your company or your business license was suspended? A company's reputation can be damaged with a single misstep with immigration authorization. The potential negative press and public disgrace just are not worth taking shortcuts to avoid obtaining the proper documents.
David?
At the end of the day, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't know," just doesn't get you off the hook.
David, you know who often gets overlooked at this stage? The spouse and dependents. At the same time as you're dealing with your employee's visa issues, you should also address the issue of whether the trailing spouse is able to get a work permit in the host country without a specific offer. This way, the family knows up front whether that spouse will be able to work in the host country. In addition, you should consider whether there are any visa or immigration restrictions for common law spouses, whether of the same or opposite sex. To a lesser extent, companies may want to consider whether dependents will be able to work if they come of age while the family is on assignment.
That's true, Jennifer. I have seen partners and spouses denied entry into certain countries based on this. Let's put aside the employment or travel authorization issues for now and turn to look at some of the costs, assuming there are no barriers to entry. International assignments can cost a company hundreds of thousands of dollars. As an example, we'll show later on how providing an individual with a benefit could actually cost the company, say, double the value of the benefit itself. Proper planning and projection is vital to the success of the assignment. So what do you do if your company doesn't have much experience sending employees abroad on assignment? As we saw earlier in the polling questions, there are a number of you who have no one that's gone on assignment from 0 to 10. It will take a fair amount of time to find and work with third-party service providers or research the costs yourself and accumulate all these costs. Taking time to properly estimate costs can avoid large overruns, as the costs are actually incurred. Trust me, a really easy way to have any project viewed as a failure is to have unplanned costs and events arise after the initial planning stages. If I had $1 for every time someone said to me, "Why didn't anyone tell me about that earlier?" I would be, well, maybe I wouldn't have enough to retire, but you get the picture. Individuals within your organization who are not involved with the detailed planning can easily see poor results, whether financial or just what we call noise, from the expatriate or anyone else participating in the assignment planning and execution. Do what you can to avoid this, not only to make the overall assignment more successful, but, to be blunt, to make your life easier as well. No one wants to deal with unpleasant situations that could have been avoided. Cost accumulation does start with the pre-assignment preparation. However, as I mentioned before, there is interplay between some of these life cycle stages. You can see in the corner of this slide, the assignee selection and pre-departure planning stages are both highlighted. They're not mutually exclusive. You have to be aware that sending a family of 4 abroad will usually be more costly than sending a single individual. So an assignment will have an official start and end date, as documented in the assignment letter. However, the individual will often need to take one or more business trips to the host location before the official start date. A typical example would be a project-based assignment. Say the employee's experience is required to get the project off the ground and running. The individual may need to oversee some of the initial tasks on-site without devoting 100% of his or her time to the project. Business trips back and forth provide a good balance between avoiding the full expat benefits early on and having the individual in the host location when necessary. Where you live is a function of what you can afford, what people and places you like to be around, and the acceptable distance to commute to all the other places you need to travel. In assignment situations where family members also move, there is added pressure to find the best possible housing so that's convenient for schooling, recreation, and any other activities in which the family participates. House hunting trips often allow the assignee, and possibly his or her spouse, to tour the host city and the available accommodation. The goal here is to select a residence that is safe, geographically well suited to the family, and of course, within budget. Sending an employee on a house hunting trip may seem like one of the benefits that can be axed as a cost-cutting measure. I'm going to share a tip that one of my high school teachers told my class way back. Cheaper is more expensive. Okay, well, that's not always true, but you get the gist. Don't make the mistake of cutting destination services too quickly. The cost of the house hunting trip likely pales in comparison to the cost of having to relocate an employee partway through the assignment if they find that original accommodation unsuitable. Think about things like lease termination fees, physical movement of belongings, shutting off and turning on utilities, and the list just goes on.
You mentioned some other destination services earlier. We want to stress that providing support to the family and the employee to help them adapt to the new country should not just happen at the beginning of the assignment. It should happen again a few months into the assignment. That's when homesickness, depression, and family tension can begin to show up after the initial euphoria and general busyness of the move. I know that we've talked about all of these items as costs. However, there are also key elements to consider in writing your assignment policy. Which things will you include in your short-term versus your long-term policy? Will you offer different tiers of each item, depending on the seniority of the individual or the reason for the assignment?
Jennifer, it can be quite difficult to accurately estimate some of these relocation and ongoing assignment costs. Here's an easy example. You know the employee needs some sort of housing in the host location, but what you may not know until close to the start of the assignment or even later is whether the individual will be keeping their home vacant while on assignment, whether they'll be selling it before they move, or whether they'll be keeping it and renting it out. Why does that matter? Well, the employee could need assistance with security and maintenance, property disposition costs, or storage and rental services. There may also be significant tax savings available, depending on whether the employee has dual housing available for their use. This huge tax saving should not be passed up if at all possible. We would all love to have that crystal ball that makes our lives easier, to know what decisions are going to be made before they're actually made. But back in the real world, some decisions just cannot be made until close to the start of the assignment or even later. There are external forces in play after all, for example, the housing sale and rental markets. So you've put in countless hours to determine all the required relocation services, estimate the costs, and tally how much everything is going to cost the business. Good, so we're set, right? Time to set the employee off to start the assignment? Wait a minute. What about that thing we all love to hate? The thing that stresses us out each year in March and April for those of you in Canada or the US. We're talking about the tax man, of course. There are even more choices and policy decisions to make, so get comfortable and open up your cost projection worksheet again. Jennifer, why do we have choices? Why can't we just send an employee on assignment and worry about the tax later when the returns need to be filed?
Because taxes can affect compensation and the overall cost of the assignment. A tax policy is an important part of an assignment policy. It is important to address upfront what the tax consequences are of various compensation items and whether the company is responsible for the resulting host and home country tax. Companies can decide to equalize an individual. That is, the company would be responsible for any host country tax, would also be responsible for any additional home country tax that might arise on certain benefits. In this situation, the goal is for the individual to neither gain by getting the benefit of low or no tax in the host location, nor lose by paying more tax in the host location than she would have if she had remained in the home country. Another alternative is to have tax protection. In this situation, the individual benefits if going to a low or no tax jurisdiction, but the company bears any additional tax costs if the employee is sent to a higher tax country. The final option is to have the individual be responsible for all of the host and home country taxes resulting from the assignment. Even in this situation, however, if the move was initiated by the business, the employer would normally offer some tax assistance in the form of gross-ups on relocation-specific allowances. The assignment policy should also indicate whether the company is willing to assist with the preparation of tax returns in order to help the individual meet their personal tax filing obligations. This is generally a standard part of the policy if the individual is equalized, but it should also be considered in other cases for at least the year the individual moves to the host country. Such assistance will help relieve one of the stresses of transferring to a new country. As part of the tax policy, the company should look at the countries in which it is operating and determine the taxation of incentive compensation, particularly deferred compensation, that it provides to employees. It should also provide the individual with a tax consultation before the move so that the employee is aware of these issues. This way, both the company and the individual are aware up front if there are potential double taxation issues that may result. Depending on the countries in which you operate, such situations may be rare, so the company may not state explicitly what will be done in that case, but there should be a stated awareness of the issue, and the executive compensation group should have a plan in place to deal with those situations, perhaps on a case-by-case basis.
Right, and these consultations are an important part of the pre-assignment planning stage. They're a confidential meeting between the employer and third-party service provider, and having that independent party assist the employee avoids the employer becoming unnecessarily involved in the employee's personal tax matters. With an understanding of the employee's particular situation, the service provider can relieve some of the fears of the employee about the financial consequences of the assignment.
Thanks, David. A couple of other points in this area. Most countries tax based on where the individual is either resident or rendering services. But if your company has U.S. persons, you should be aware that they are one of the few people taxed based on their citizenship. In addition, because of the many U.S. taxation rules that apply to such persons, you should know whether someone you are transferring is a U.S. person, so that you can assess whether that will complicate the tax issues that you as an employer have to manage. Finally, your tax policy should consider what happens if the individual is paid deferred compensation after she returns home, which is partly earned while on assignment. This is called trailing income. Some countries do not impose any tax on such income if the final vesting happens after the individual leaves the country. However, other countries expect to receive income tax on that income, even if it vests several years after the individual has left the country. In such cases, the tax policy should indicate whether the company will assist the individual with the preparation of tax returns in the home and host countries. We now have polling question 3.
Thanks, Jennifer. So polling question number 3, now that we've finished talking all about the various tax policy options, is what type of assignment policy does your company have? Tax equalization, tax protection, hybrid, none, or uncertain? So while we wait for some of the results to come through, we're going to answer another question from the audience. Jen, actually this one more to David, I guess. What is the average cost of an assignment?
Well, Chantal, it will depend on where the individual is going and what the length of the assignment. But as a general rule of thumb, you can estimate, say, 3 to 5 times the employee's salary as an average cost.
Good. And I also know that a lot of companies also choose commuter or business traveler assignments, thinking that those tend to be cheaper. But in the end, they're quite surprised at how costly or expensive those can still be if you don't manage your cost well.
Sure.
And on that note, let's get our polling results to come through. And we see that the majority of people use tax equalization as a tax payment policy. So good. I know my experience, we are shifting a little bit to tax protection, but that's more in the European space. A lot of European companies use tax protection or net to gross instead. Or in the mining and engineering industries as well, we see that happening. So on that note, we're now going to pass the presentation back on to David to discuss tax gross-ups.
Thanks, Chantal. Jennifer mentioned tax gross-ups and trailing liabilities a little earlier. So the purpose of today's session is not to get into the tax technical details, but I wanted to show you an example to illustrate how these costs can accumulate very quickly. So the concept of a tax gross-up, using a really simple example, I can demonstrate this. If you have an employer who is giving a gift card to the employee that's valued at $300, that employer may want the employee to receive the $300 with no net tax costs. So they still have that $300 left in their pocket to spend. What the employer will have to do in that case is do a tax gross-up. So they will pay the tax on that $300 so the employee is still left with that $300 in their pocket. For the international assignee, taxable relocation benefits are a common example. The employer may offer to bear the costs of relocating an employee as an incentive for that employee to accept the assignment. When the employer bears the cost of the taxes, that in turn becomes a taxable benefit. And again, the employer needs to bear the tax on that new taxable benefit. As you can see, this is a circular calculation, which does eventually have a final result. Now, the example that you see on the screen is just showing you some actual numbers. So if we assume that there's a $20,000 moving allowance that's paid to an individual to help them with their moving costs, if you take a moderate tax jurisdiction where the individual tax rate is 25%, that $20,000 benefit now costs the company approximately $27,000. If you take the same $20,000 allowance and apply a tax rate of 46%, which is common for a lot of people in Ontario, the cost is now $37,000, an extra $17,000 more just based on the gross up. Peeking back at the assignment life cycle diagram in the top corner, we can see that several buttons are lit up here. And this is just a reminder that tax gross ups and income tax matters in general need to be thought of at different times during the assignment. Another income tax matter that can creep into the picture and make a huge splash if you're not prepared is a trailing tax liability. The idea is not overly complex to understand, even for those who may not have a tax or finance background. However, this is easily one of the most frequent areas of misunderstanding. I can't tell you how often I've explained before, during, and after an assignment why trailing obligations exist. There always seems to be that element of surprise when the person on the other end of the phone hears that there are still taxes owing in a country where they have not lived or worked in for the past 3 years. To see the complete picture for an assignment, you have to think about issues that may come up after the assignment is complete. And this can be as simple as looking ahead to see if there's any income payable after the employee repatriates. Take a really simple example. If an employee ends an assignment in December 2013, but receives a bonus in February of 2014 for the services provided in that previous calendar year, you now have a bonus paid through a home country payroll to an employee in that country. But the bonus was actually earned for services performed in the other location. The host location will not be aware of the bonus at the time it's paid, and therefore they can't process the income properly on their end. You can see how it's easy to get to the tax return stage in February of 2015, and only then have the host country payroll become aware of the liability when it's time to pay the balance due on the return. What if the business makes a common mistake of not authorizing the employee for 2014 tax prep services? This could be missed altogether. The issues can easily become more complex with the use of incentive compensation, as you'll see on the next example. This could include stock options and restricted stock. So in this example, we have an employee who is granted 100 restricted stock units that vest while she is on assignment in the U.S., but were granted in Canada prior to the assignment. She's also expected to receive a new grant of 150 units while in the U.S. after the assignment starts. What we need to think about is, how will the income from those units be taxed in Canada and in the U.S.? Is the income taxable in both locations, and will there be any double taxation? Are the tax rules in both locations the same? That is, do both countries recognize income at the same time and in the same way? Can we expect employees to incur higher tax liability on the 2017 vesting solely as a result of the assignment they were on? If that's the case, will they be compensated for that, or will they have to bear the extra cost? Domestic tax rules for incentive compensation can often be complex on their own. Throw in travel between multiple countries by an employee, foreign compensation plan that was never designed to consider your country's tax rules, and you can quickly muddy the waters that result in major tax liabilities. But how do you minimize the chances of missing such a big issue? This is where tax compliance services come into play. Just as you have to figure out how to structure an employee's compensation, you also have to figure out what tax services an expat will require. I remember an old commercial when I was young for a store called Canadian Tire. At that time, their slogan was Canadian Tire, more than just tires. My version of that is tax compliance, more than just tax return preparation. Tax return preparation is one of the last steps in an annual cycle, but by the time you get to the tax return preparation stage, the calendar or fiscal year is already over, and there are few opportunities to change the final outcome. The life cycle diagram in the top corner, as you'll see, is fully lit. There are tax compliance services available to help you in all stages of the assignment life cycle. Again, with the goal of saving your business and your employee money and relieving stress from your life.
Okay. Thanks, David. Let's move on now to payroll options. So, almost all countries will require that the transferred individual be put onto some form of a local payroll in order to facilitate the payment of withholding taxes. However, this does not mean that the company has to actually pay the individual onshore. They would use a shadow payroll. For both short-term and long-term assignments, the policy can provide for the individual to receive a salary in line with his home country pay levels and to continue to stay in home country benefits and incentive plans. There would then be an adjustment for housing, per diem, or the different costs of living. In order to provide the individual with sufficient funds to live on in the host country while minimizing the impact of foreign currency fluctuations on the take-home pay, the company can operate a split payroll. Under this scenario, the individual would choose how much of his total compensation he wished to be paid in the local currency and how much should remain in the home country currency. Generally, either HR or a relocation service provider would provide some guidance as to the optimal split of income to be received in the host country. With employee-initiated moves or permanent transfers, the individual will often be transferred fully to local payroll. This means local pay levels are considered, the individual is paid in local currency, and any top-ups in the modified local scenario are also paid in the local currency. Even in such cases, if it is a business-initiated move, the company may consider retaining the individual on a notional salary in the home country so he can remain in the company's pension plan if the local entity does not have a comparable pension scheme. There are, of course, limits to the length of time that the individual can continue to be part of the home country pension. Some companies have identified a group of individuals who will rotate through global assignments for an extended period and may not have a true home country. In this case, they may consider either a global employment company, otherwise known as a GEC, or having a theoretical home country. Setting up a GEC can be costly and difficult to administer if there's not a large enough population. This is one of the reasons that they had fallen out of favor. But we've seen recently that they're making a resurgence. Because of the difficulties with GECs, some companies use a theoretical home country to achieve the same results. The individual's base salary, benefits, taxes, and bonus are all based on the rates of this theoretical home country, which is usually an average of 2 or 3 countries. Pension benefits would also be based on this notional country or mirror the head office plan. I believe that leads into your discussion, David, on pensions.
Yeah, there are a few factors to consider with respect to Social Security. Do both you and the employee need to continue remitting Social Security premiums in the home location? What premiums are payable in the host location? And are there any instances where you have to pay twice? If there are alternatives, which provides the greatest overall benefit? These same questions apply to employee and employer pension contributions, but can have an even greater tax consequence due to the amount of funds going into a pension plan each year. There are Social Security agreements and income tax treaties between many countries that address situations of double taxation. It's important to review the treaties and agreements to ensure proper actions and positions are being taken in both locations. While income tax rates in Canada are higher than many other countries, our annual Social Security contribution rates are relatively low, and it may be cost efficient to have an individual contribute to Canadian Social Security. There are other considerations, however.
So we're now going to move to our fourth polling question. When do you start planning for the employee's repatriation? We're looking at pre-assignment planning stage, during the assignment, immediately before the assignment ends, and what repatriation planning. I like the what repatriation planning. So we're just going to answer one question because we're running a little bit short of time here while we just wait for the polling results to come through. So, David or Jennifer, is there a checklist somewhere that we can use? That's one of the questions from our audience members.
Well, you can certainly talk to one of your service providers. They would definitely have checklists to help you at different stages depending on what services they provide. So your relocation provider or your payroll service provider would have different checklists to help you on each stage.
Good. And I would also think that if you go to your tax advisor, et cetera, they would usually have a checklist they can provide just for you to think of the different components of the policy that you need to address, as well as David's assignment diagram is an excellent one that you can also use as a checklist. Okay? So let's look at our polling results as they come through for us. And we see that top of mind, pre-assignment planning stage. That's an excellent result, and that's what we want to see. So now we're going to discuss repatriation planning.
I'm glad to see that we're all on the same page. At the same time that the business is planning for the assignment, it should be planning for the eventual repatriation of the assignee. During the assignment, there should be plans in place for the individual to return to the home country on a regular basis, perhaps as part of home leave, in order to maintain the relationship with his immediate manager and team, and to discuss how the new skills he's developing can be used in the future. The company should also consider assigning someone to keep him updated on events at head office or to keep him on emailing lists. And HR or talent management should start discussing his next role before the end of the assignment. Finally, provisions should be made for the re-assimilation of the expatriate and to help him deal with reverse culture shock. Such measures are likely to increase the chance of the employee remaining with the company after repatriation rather than feeling cut off and perhaps being put in a mediocre role that doesn't make use of the talents that he gained on the assignment.
So we're coming close to the end of the presentation here today, and I want to leave enough time to talk about the steps that need to be taken before you actually start applying for an assignment. But as you'll see on the screen here, there are some other challenges that you need to consider. The main one here is corporate tax considerations. What can happen is an individual or an entity, a home entity, can be deemed to have a permanent establishment, or as we say, a PE, in the host location. And this can trigger corporate tax filing requirements in the host location for the home entity. It can be quite challenging to understand when a PE is created, so make sure you reach out to your service provider to get a better understanding of what the issues are and what alternatives you have.
So let's wrap up by going over some planning considerations and then a brief case study. First, consider the entire assignment life cycle when planning for a new assignment. The repatriation is as important as the initial transfer. Note that we only covered some of the elements of a policy. There are other things to consider. For example, how to assess the individual's performance during the assignment, having an emergency plan even if the region isn't currently volatile, and specifying in your policy what will happen if the company wants to terminate the individual's employment while he's on assignment. Next, in order to estimate the entire cost of the assignment, prepare a multi-year projection prior to the start of the assignment. After the business has looked at this, it may decide that there's a better way to achieve these particular objectives. Third, ensure that all groups that may be affected are consulted in the planning stage in order to flush out any potential issues. Develop a standard assignment policy and develop procedures that allow for enforcement of the policy with limited exceptions. Finally, estimate the growth of the company's international assignment population and the mix between short-term and long-term assignments so that you can determine when additional resources will be required. So that brings us into our case study. So currently your company has no foreign operations, but you have just won a bid for a major international project that you have to start next month. What are the key issues that you need to consider until you put a formal assignment policy in place?
How about how long is the project expected to last? How many employees will we need to send abroad? And will any of them need to go to the country before the project actually starts?
And knowing the answers to these questions, you can start considering and making a timeline for dealing with immigration issues, assessment of the identified employees, what allowances will they need to live there, payroll, what are the payroll reporting and tax requirements, do you need to apply for exemptions under an income tax treaty, and do you need to consider other income tax issues for both the employee and the company? So
we've covered a lot of material today, but I hope the ideas and concepts have really shown the value of proper planning, structure, and review. The main takeaway that you have to have from this webcast is that essentially you get out what you put in. Flying by the seat of your pants may eventually accomplish what you want, but the road will be full of speed bumps and potholes. There are many options available for setting up your international assignments, and you're certainly not left alone to make the decisions without expert advice.
So thanks, David and Jen. That was great. Thank you today for hosting the presentation. That now completes our webcast for today. I'd like to thank you, audience, for attending and taking the time to listen to our presentation today. We've run a little bit of time, so we don't have time to take any more questions. However, if your question was not answered today, we will strive to get back to you as soon as possible and answer the questions that have been submitted. And for those who have not submitted any questions, please feel free to either to contact myself, David, or Jennifer, Our contact details are on the slide in front of you, as well as please contact any one of your team members who can assist you. We're now going to just mention to you, bring your attention to the fact we are having another webcast at the end of February, and this one will be on foreign reporting requirements. Also, our recent What If podcast, which may be of interest to you, are posted on our PwC website, and we've put in the URL to attach those podcasts there in the presentation. And we will be issuing some new podcasts towards the end of this month on top mobility issues for tax directors to think about. Same URL mentioned in the above podcast can be used to link to these upcoming podcasts. So thank you again today for attending. And on that note, we're now going to end our webcast.